Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Haidy Marzouk from the PPR Committee of the AAOA, and we're having another chat virtually with an expert on a topic that's really exciting and really at the forefront of medicine lately, which is artificial intelligence. Earlier in the year, we did a little summary from our annual meeting with the one-on-one on Jack with Jack Krause from an AI expert. And I learned a lot, but it left me with a lot of interesting questions. And so I said, why don't we kind of have a chat with another AI expert in the field of otolaryngology? So I'm joined today with Dr. Rameau. She is an associate professor of otolaryngology at Weill Cornell in New York City. Her subspecialty is laryngology, and she is NIH funded. And one of her big research interests is the application of artificial intelligence within the field of laryngology. Welcome, Dr. Rameau.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marzouk. I'm excited to be here.
So tell me, what got you interested in this particular field of research?
I had the opportunity to do my training at Stanford University back in the early 2010s. And I think this was the time that a lot of the machine learning exploration was happening. So I was hearing about it, and it wasn't really until I started as faculty at Cornell that I started to think about how can we apply these new technologies to basically do more refined analytics of some of the data we have, especially in laryngology, we have a lot of voice data. And so starting in 2017, I was interested in seeing how we could use some of this AI technology applied to the voice data to see whether we can detect disease. So that was one of the things that kind of brought me to the field of AI. So I remember at the time I was reading a lot of papers and not really understanding much about neural networks. But as I continued reading, this became more familiar to me. And so I was lucky in some ways to become one of the early adopters and early researchers in the field.
Wonderful. So one of the things is you mentioned was application in laryngology. Do you see the use of AI kind of branching out? So you said stuff about like voice analysis, for example. I read something recently about the use of AI, for example, in picking up sleep apnea. Where do you see promising areas where AI might be applicable clinically, um, for us day-to-day, physicians?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are different areas. Right now, we're seeing a lot of pilot studies that are applying AI to different types of data sets, be it, breathing sounds in sleep apnea or voice. But really, I think we need to think about big categories. So one of the big categories right now is in delivery science, and that's really healthcare delivery science. So how do we incorporate AI to basically make the process of seeing patients and managing them more efficient, safer, better? And that's where we're seeing a lot of work being done right now, because since we have the large language models, we are able to do things that we were not able to do before, such as summarizing the clinical interactions, doing clinical reasoning, doing interactions also with insurance companies, so the pre-authorization process. All of that is becoming now potentially a source of more efficiency and lesser cost. So that's where we're seeing a lot of things. Then there is another part of healthcare in relation to ENT where we're seeing also some interest, and that's more in the digital health space. And so that would be more in potentially consumer products. So how can we now introduce wearables or ubiquitous cell phones in people's homes so that now they can monitor their own health and not depend on coming to the doctor for assessment. So there's a lot of interest in that space. There's interest in also applications within telehealth, remote patient monitoring. All of that is within kind of the digital health environment. And then there is also everything that's about innovation, things that we could not imagine to do before. For instance, using AI to develop new medicines, to potentially help surgeons become more effective in surgery by getting feedback. And that's more in the innovation world. So those are the big things that I'm seeing. We didn't really touch upon it, but obviously within ENT, there are a lot of images, and I think that's where there's a lot of potential in general with AI, because AI can be very good at computer vision. So from radiology images to all the video endoscopies that we have across all of our special subspecialties within ENT, there's really a potential of really improving the standardization across all otolaryngologists. So we call everything the same thing rather than having different assessment by different clinicians. So that's very exciting.
Sure. All right. Well, you said a lot, and it all was very interesting. So I actually want to drill down on a couple of points because, you know, you said easier day in the office and efficiency and better patient care. And likely, all my light bulbs went off and I got very excited because I have a very busy office and I'm sure a lot of our membership does too. So if for, the day-to-day clinician like me, where can I use AI specifically to kind of make my office flow better? You had mentioned things about pre-authorization, things about better communication with patients. You don't have to mention any necessarily specific products, but can you describe some of the technology that's available to us as clinicians to purchase or to look into to help our practices run better? Or at least, what's available out there that uses AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm part of a bigger healthcare system. So for us, we're using one of the very well-known EHR system that is now incorporating a lot of these capabilities. So in our case, for instance, through that one, provider of the EHR, we're able to access a lot of these things, including one of the ambient AI scribes that can help with the note creation, but also it has incorporated now the capabilities for doing pre-authorization, but those are all services that you actually have to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's where the conversation becomes a little bit more complicated because obviously, if it's very costly, then you need to think about whether it makes sense for you to incorporate this new tool if it's not in the end really helping with the cost efficiency. So,
Sure.
so there are many, many brands, and if you look for ambient scribes, you will see some of the big names in the field. I will not name them, but certainly they are all very effective right now.
Mm-hmm.
They come at different costs, and one thing that people should be aware of is that they're not necessarily tailored to your specific practice. But as you get to use them more, they get to basically learn about you and the type of patients you tend to see, the way you're writing your notes. And depending on the system you have access to, there is some tailoring that can occur.
Yeah.
So it can make things more efficient for you if you have, more interaction with a specific insurance and a pattern of, pre-authorization that needs to happen, then that can be more efficient that way because it can learn the patterns. But just be aware that the insurance companies also are starting to use AI. So it's a little bit of a situation where everyone is kind of competing with each other and the AI is
Sure.
becoming very good at, opposing the other
Sure.
party.
It's two AI systems fighting. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I will say that I do also use an ambient AI scribe through my EHR at work, and I actually merged my ENT template with some of the stuff that the AI auto populates to make it more ENT friendly, and I have had a great experience with it. When you mention the cost, one of the things that we think about, and I also work for a large healthcare system, is the option of, right, the live scribe or the live employee with their, you know, a computer or doesn't need a 401k or health insurance and stuff like that. So that's all stuff that's people are starting to kind of look into with
Right.
larger models. Along the same vein, though, I find AI scary, right? In a sense that when I have used it, for example, for medical knowledge, right? If type into Google, right? It automatically sometimes will give you an AI assistant that'll pull up things that are actually very inaccurate and not evidence-based. And my understanding is that there are newer platforms now to help me be a better doctor that pulls, it's an AI that's trained for evidence-based medicine and medical literature. Actually, a lot of the ENT residents have been using that stuff to kind of improve their knowledge base, and we're learning from them, some of the boundaries of where the technology is going. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure,
Into
you mean the
that use
limitations
and
of the
yeah,
technology? Yeah,
yeah, I
absolutely.
mean, I always want guidance, right? I don't want to rely so heavily on the computer that I can't vet the information I'm getting. Like I said, I can use an AI assistant on Google, and I know it's giving me something that's not an evidence-based piece of information, right? So, how can I vet what's churning out of an AI system? Or are there platforms that are kind of pre-vetted, towards our specialty so that when we're gaining medical knowledge or using them, we can have a little bit less anxiety in terms of the quality of the information we're getting?
So there are intrinsic limitations right now with the large language models, which is what we're talking about right now, which are basically algorithms that are mathematical and are predicting the next best word in a sentence, taking into account the context of the sentence. And so as a result, this is not really the way we think as humans, right? So we don't think in this mathematical way. And so AI can produce these confabulations or hallucinations. And the way the transformer models exist right now that are fueling these large language models is ultimately limited by that. And there's some research going on how to limit the extent of the hallucinations and try to minimize that problem. But currently, that is a problem that is intrinsic to the technology, and we can't really completely avoid it, which means that you still need human expert supervision at this point. Although there are ways through basically prompting, which is the way we interact with these models, we write to them and then they respond. And the more you learn how to prompt well, the more you're likely to get the type of answer you want and have a higher degree of accuracy. Now, there are other things you can do. I mean, there's a system called RAG that allows you to basically train your large language model specifically on the domain of knowledge that you're interested in. Let's say PubMed, and then it's more likely to be more accurate because it's now going to be pulling a lot of the information from that data set. You can also have a more fixed data set, for instance, a textbook, and then it's going to be basically be regurgitating a lot of what's in the textbook and summarizing it. So that's more likely to be accurate. But at this point, I will say that if you haven't developed one of these systems, then you should really supervise the AI. There's a great paper, though, that was written by colleagues in Calgary that's called Chat ENT. And there are a couple of ENT chatbots that have been created that are specifically doing that are basically pulling the information from an existing body of knowledge and are making the information a little bit more specific and accurate to our field.
Sure, that's wonderful. Yeah, I know of at least two AI platforms for medicine specifically that, and I remember when search engines first came out, right? And we were trying to learn to use them. It would give us a lot of, extraneous material until we understood like exactly what to put in the search fields, right, to get what we wanted. And I think, there's a learning curve here for AI too, something similar. But yeah, if you guys, our membership kind of looks, there are platforms out there to give us kind of expedited medical knowledge using AI that can be helpful.
One of them is
So
actually partnering with New England Journal of Medicine. I'm not going to name them, but
yeah,
so they're really trying to retrieve the really most up-to-date information from that resource.
that's wonderful. Another thing, on that vein is you had mentioned the application of and analyzing large data sets for research purposes. Can you give me an example, of how we're using AI in research, specifically to kind of expedite, or do things in research that we weren't able to do previously using large language models?
Sure. So, I mean, now we have the capability of, starting with a data set that might be very, very large and not really having a hypothesis, and basically trying to infer conclusions from that data set and associations without really, going with a hypothesis and trying to see basically the large trends that you see in that data set. So that's really one of the new capabilities we have. That's not necessarily large language models, although they can also fuel that. It can be more the supervised machine learning type of models. But yeah, no, with AI, we see a lot of really interesting research that's being published. I'm actually an associate editor of machine learning and artificial intelligence for Laryngoscope, and I get to see a lot of the different types of research that are coming through. And I will say that although there are some applications right now in head and neck in those large data sets, one of the limitations is these data sets themselves, right? So, and that's always a big issue with these data science projects, that there are intrinsic limitations, again, with that data set. What is accurate? You don't always get the granularity. Sometimes there's missing information. And so as a result, you can't always prove your conclusions. So I think that right now we're seeing, especially in head and neck surgery, a lot of efforts to do multi-institutional research and really bring data from different institutions together and try to really have excellent data in order to fuel better research.
So the data sets are almost the AI is kind of helping us even know what questions to ask, but it's limited by the information presented, right? It's not like I'm checking a hypothesis. It's actually giving me the question to ask for the research and then spurring it from there.
Yeah, in
Very
fact,
interesting.
no, it is very interesting. In fact, the other day, I was interacting with AI in that way. I was, asking AI to give me areas of research that were not explored within a specific field, and I was very impressed with the output. So certainly, I mean, I personally find that AI helps augment me, because now I can basically really rapidly get information that otherwise would have taken me hours of research and reading of articles. So it's really helpful in that way to become more efficient. But then the more dependent you become on the technology, the more, you're less likely to do your own research, and maybe the AI is imperfect and you're missing something. So you always have to be careful.
Yeah. So use it, but cross-check.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see what you mean. So you had mentioned how the data sets themselves are imperfect. One of the concerns I've heard about or been reading about is because the data sets are limited potentially by the demographics, within the patient pools and stuff like that, there's concerns about health equity and the equity piece of the research coming out with AI models, and that that the AI itself might be biased towards the preponderance of a certain demographic in the data set, and so it might actually further propagate some of the healthcare inequity or the biases that we're seeing in research. And so it opens up a lot, an ethical Pandora's box, if you will, in terms of the use of AI in clinical care and in research. What are your thoughts about that? Or what have you heard about what's being done to kind of, do you think that's a valid concern? Are there things being done to mitigate it?
I know that, for instance, I'm part of the Bridge to AI program from the NIH, and one of the points that was emphasized by the NIH, it was that we had to create a data set of human voices, and we wanted to capture not only specific disease cohorts, but we also wanted to make sure that we were representing a diversity of people, because we know that, for instance, voice and speech can be affected by things like education, socioeconomic status, accents, etc. So really, that was an important part of it. I will say that right now the NIH is changing a little bit of the demographic reporting. So that may impact to some extent these questions around equity. Yes, that's a big problem. We know that AI tends to be biased towards the data that it's most exposed to. The reality is that a lot of the existing large data sets out there are biased towards certain populations. And we're seeing that also in our own data generation projects where, for instance, we have multiple sites involved. And we've noticed that our patients in New York City, they just don't have the time. So they don't really have the time to participate in the study. And so they don't tend to participate. And they might be more socioeconomically well off compared to some of the patients, for instance, in Tampa, who are much more likely to participate. So, and there might be also an age difference because if you're retired, maybe you have more time and you're more likely to participate. So that's the problem. You know, the data sets in the end are really what are going to fuel the accuracy of the AI and its ability to provide accurate information to a diversity of people. And, you know, if you don't have that diversity of data set, that can be a problem. There are some people who are thinking of solutions for this type of problem. One of them is federated learning. So basically not sharing data across institutions, but training AI at individual institutions and then using the AI or like all the different AIs that are produced to train a bigger AI. So basically the AI would be trained on a much larger data set without having to share the data across institutions. So that's one solution. Another solution that people are investigating is synthetic data. So now you can create synthetic data to potentially compensate for the lack of representation of a specific demographics. So then you could potentially balance, you know, the accuracy across different groups. There are ways also mathematically for you to change the weight of the algorithm for different populations. There are also controversies as to whether you should label your data with socioeconomic demographic information or just make sure you have the diversity because you don't want to bias the AI also to recognize a certain pattern depending on the socio-demographic background. So yeah, so that is an intrinsic problem and, you know, but a lot of people are really thinking about how to solve this issue around bias.
Sure. I mean, that's always been an issue in research. You know, whenever we were talking about ethical concerns in research and, you know, healthcare equity in research, right? Or these are all big issues that have been around forever, and AI is no exception. And the thing that I kind of wanted to get this video or podcast going for is, you know, when we were training, we always said, okay, what makes a paper a good paper, right? And we had to have journal clubs where we assess the quality of the literature and if it's something you can go by, and all of these, you know, things that we got trained to do. I think the next step is that we're going to be doing the same thing with AI generated material, right? Is, you know, how to assess our AI generated material the same way we are used to assessing journal papers, to do that cross-checking and really get good quality of information. And I think our patients are using some of this AI generated output too, on, you know, being able to help them kind of navigate these waters. So this was so helpful in terms of kind of knowing what's out there that I can use right away, right?
Yeah.
Knowing what's coming up the pike and not being so afraid of it. So that way, when I use things that are AI generated, I have a little bit better idea of how to vet it. You know, is it giving me sources, understanding, you know, what it's using when it's trained, so that I can kind of get a better idea of how I can apply it so that I can keep up. So I appreciate it so much, Dr. Rameau. Is there anything I missed or that you wanted to add that you think would be useful for our members?
You know, this is a big revolution in the human history. I really believe so. And I think it's each individual's responsibility to really learn as much as possible and, you know, keep a critical eye. And, you know, I'm always looking for reviewers for our AI papers, and it's a little difficult. But I really hope that people self-educate and learn how to appraise an AI paper because we need to have good literature and because we need to learn to be critical and make sure that the knowledge base remains of very high quality.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time again.
Thank you so much, and have a good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks.